Hi, everybody, and thank you so much for joining the 21st SF Doc Fest. The festival is running June 1st through June 12th in person at the Roxy Theater, as well as online with our digital programs. And thank you so much to the filmmakers for joining us today for our program, Worth a Thousand Words. I'm just going to jump in and ask you each to introduce yourself and tell us which film you're here with. We'll kick it off with you, Debbie. Hi.
Hi there, thanks so much for having us. I'm Debbie Cornwall, and my film is Pineland Hollywood. I am the director, the editor, and the producer.
Everything, ma'am. Thank you so much. Hi, Edward. Can you introduce yourself?
Hello, I'm Edward Frumkin. I use he, him, his pronouns, and I'm the director of The American Frontier.
Thank you so much. Welcome. And hello, Gaspar. Welcome.
Hi. It's nice to be here. I'm Gaspar Gonzalez, and I'm the director-producer of A Date with History.
Wonderful. Well, I'm so excited that we get to share this program that really uses kind of historical lens to look at different events through the use of kind of mixed form media with an emphasis, I would say, on archival work that really helps to shape the narratives that you present. And Gaspar, maybe we'll start off with you, which I think your film is unique out of the bunch, is that you use a different varying modes to kind of access telling the story. Can you talk about kind of the genesis of your film, how you brought it together, what inspired you to create this work?
Yeah, I sort of stumbled upon the story accidentally. I do documentaries, and I spend a lot of time researching kind of different topics, and you spend a lot of time with old publications and newspapers, and I was actually working on a totally different project when I came across a very small news item that reported the arrest of the man and the woman in the film. And there was nothing, kind of exceptional about it. It was just being reported, but I was instantly sort of drawn to just the idea that this would be news, right? And it ran in the Miami Herald as a small news item, and then it got picked up by Jet Magazine. And I actually saw it in, I saw it in the Herald first, and then I followed up on it. But, even that small news item had a lot of details. The fact that she was a teacher, the fact that, they gave their age, it gave their names, obviously. And I thought, I was struck by, and I've made films about the civil rights movement. I've made films about, the Jim Crow era, but there was just something about that news item and seeing that people's lives could be sort of laid bare like that. And they could be destroyed in a way. I mean, she lost her job as a school teacher. And then I started digging. And I realized that she had actually taken that trip to, she'd gotten away from Miami when the whole thing was kind of in the news. And then I spoke to people in the community, and there are people actually who remembered that. I mean, that was 67, 68 years ago. I found people who remembered the story. So that's how I came upon the story. And then in terms of telling it, I had never really done reenactment. We use a lot of archival film in our work, interviews, obviously, original photography, but not reenactment. But there was something about the story. It was a very intimate story, and we had access to the actual motel where it had happened. It's the Booker Terrace in the film. It later became the Hampton House. And today it's a cultural center, but they've preserved a couple of rooms. And so we were able to utilize those spaces, utilize the motel, and that was sort of too tempting to pass up as a storyteller. And that's why we made those choices.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Debbie, I feel like there are also some connections. Obviously, all of the films in here are connected, but I feel like it's really lucky that I have the three of you here because we can kind of talk about this progression. So from Gaspar's film, where we see this like sumptuous Hollywood quality recreations, Debbie, you utilize Hollywood cinema to tell another story that is also kind of ripped from the headlines, if you will. Can you talk about kind of the genesis of how you found this story and how you accessed using existing media to kind of build out your narrative?
Sure. Yeah, it's fascinating to see how we're all using these different strategies, including found footage. I am a former civil rights lawyer before I turned to visual expression in the form of photography and photo books. And in the process of researching my second photo book called Necessary Fictions, which came out in the fall of 2020, I came across the Pineland story and kind of filed it away as a case study. The book is about the blurring of fact and fiction in American life, and I was making pictures on military bases of immersive, realistic military training scenarios for soldiers preparing to wage war abroad. And so I'm steeping myself in these issues, and I'm reading as much as I can, and I'm watching Hollywood films to see how these kinds of questions are represented. And I think I was watching Bridge on the River Kwai, and there's that scene where this officer walks onto a base and is attacked by a man with a knife, and then someone comes out of the shrubbery and says, no, he's not in on the game. And something clicked for me. And I thought, could I tell this story using only Hollywood footage, which would raise different kinds of questions about the use of realistic war games in a militarized culture. So ultimately the piece uses about 500 clips from almost 200 Hollywood films to tell this one true story. And the last element was reaching out to the survivor, Lieutenant Stephen Phelps, Sergeant Stephen Phelps at the time, and asking if he was willing to participate, and he was. So I gathered testimony that he'd given at the original civil trial, the inevitable trial, and testimony from the cop who shot him. And I put together a script from those quotes, and ultimately Stephen performed his own testimony for the piece.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for sharing. And I think kind of the third piece of this puzzle is Edward, who you obviously take a very didactic approach to exploring kind of the extra-textual elements of kind of what we think of as kind of the great frontier, not only in cinema, but what we think about the myth of how we were shaped as a nation, right? Like the manifest destiny of it all. Accessing an iconic space like Monument Valley, which to me like sums up when you think about classic emerging Hollywood. It is the Western, what it says about representation, depiction of indigenous cultures, depiction of masculinity. And you tell this really beautifully through your exploration of what we see on the screen and what it means culturally. So can you discuss how you kind of found this material and what your access point was?
I found several films just based off few from what I gathered from the interviewees featured, like not necessarily in the direct way, but I was looking primarily from Westerns from the 30s through 75. Like there's a few exceptions in the 90s, but just to keep it mainly in 30s to 70s because that's what we think of generally before there is revisionist history, but it is a film about history and to know how it creates and how it transfers from generation to generation. Oh, did I answer about how I got this?
Yeah, like how did you decide to explore this topic? What was kind of your endpoint?
Well, I first explored and made this film as a thesis film for my university, and that I heard in the news that USC will remove the John Wayne exhibit, inspired as it was announced during this ongoing racial reckoning or this entire history of the US, and that even though there was no updates yet, it made me think about the entry points of how we interpret America, and I used Overwriter to acquire some films. All of them are in Fair Use Act, so I don't have to worry about studios and real estates and that or estates of the directors. But it made me think about which films that I should think about a little bit on those, and a little bit that's indirectly what the interviewees are saying.
Awesome. Yeah, I actually live about 5 minutes from Hollywood and Highland, where they're dismantling the like a D.W. Griffith monuments to intolerance, which is about time. It's interesting walking by and seeing this, like the plaque is still up. Like you can see that these are still kind of the things that we lauded within like the history of Hollywood, but how it's coming down, and I'll be interested to see what new artwork is put in this place. So I'm gonna pivot, just let's talk about where you're all at, kind of what are you working on now? And we'll kind of reverse it and we'll go back to you, Edward. So did you finish your thesis? You graduated. What are you up to now?
I have a couple film ideas here and there, but I need to be more active on before I could say what I'm doing next.
Mhm.
But outside of filmmaking, I have a podcast and website where I write about films called Real Print, REL Print. And some of the guests that I had on upcoming includes Daniel Hymanson of So Late So Soon, and the artistic director of True False, Chloe Turner, and a couple filmmakers at this year's SF Doc Fest, like Michael Workman, where we discuss Meantime, and Stacy Wolfel, where we discuss Keep the Cameras Rolling. So please check that out.
Awesome. And Debbie, you said that you are a former civil rights attorney. Obviously, something like that doesn't leave you, right? Well, throughout your
Once a
filmmaking
lawyer,
practice.
always a lawyer. Yeah.
Yes. Throughout your filmmaking practice and activism. What else are you up to?
Well, Pineland Hollywood is my first film, kind of experimental. Since finishing that, I finished a second one called Jade Helm, which is another case study from my book, Necessary Fictions, that looks at what happened when entire Texan towns mistook another instance of training as an invasion by the US military. And I'm kind of looking at what happens when there's disinformation out there and our institutions are ill-equipped to help us sort out fact from fiction. So I'm kind of pursuing that inquiry in moving images, going back to photography, more broadly away from the military context, but looking at what happens to a culture that really can't tell the difference anymore between what is true and what is false. So I think that's going to be a long-term interest of mine.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. And Gaspar, it seems like you're pretty active in production. It sounds like you have lots of films under your belt. What are you working on now?
You never ask people that. No. We're developing like half a dozen projects right now, because you have to, because you just never write. You just never know what's going to hit and what people are going to be interested in. One of them is it's a vintage crime story, which kind of has a cultural component. I mean, we really work in that space. We do a lot in the historical space and cultural. And so for us to really kind of sink our teeth into something, we have to feel that it does something beyond just, in this case, tell a crime story. Although it's a really great crime story. But it's also a project that it's a story about the media. And kind of how, news became entertainment, entertainment became news. And we try to pinpoint that moment, at least what we think that moment is. And we have kind of several projects in the works. And then we have another film actually on the festival circuit that is it's an hour-long film that we made some years ago. But its festival run was interrupted by COVID. So it was out there in 2019, and we thought we were going to have a great run in 2020 on the festival circuit, and that just didn't happen. So we're bringing that back, and that's a film called Errol Flynn's Ghost, Hollywood in Havana, which we filmed in Cuba in way back in 2015, 2016, and finished it in 2018, 2019. And it's kind of a history of the secret life of American movies in Cuba. So it's nice actually to be able to bring that back, and having fun with that as well. So that's kind of what takes up my time these days.
Awesome. Well, we will continue to soldier on. Can't wait to see what is next from all of you. This is just about all the time we have, but I want to thank our audience so much for joining us for the digital festival, and to our filmmakers for sharing their work with us. So thank you all so much.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure.
Thank you.